May your day and your entire week be deeply blessed. Welcome to this deep dive where we take a pretty massive stack of sources and distill them down for you.
Right, getting to the most fascinating insights you really need to know.
Exactly. And today we are unpacking a really high-stakes moment in ancient history. We're using some incredibly detailed notes from two comprehensive study Bibles, the Holman and the NAA.
And what we are looking at today is Genesis chapter 47. If you think you know the story of ancient Egypt, or, the patriarchs.
This chapter is going to totally reframe your perspective.
It really is. It's a narrative of absolute survival, extreme crisis management, and just this incredible contrast of fortunes during a severe ancient famine.
It's basically a masterclass in navigating a total crisis. So our mission for today's journey is to take you through this text. We're going to look at a very surprising meeting between two radically different world leaders.
And an ancient economic meltdown, one that actually led an entire population into voluntary servitude.
Which is wild to think about. And finally, we'll look at the dramatic final wishes of a dying patriarch. The text is just packed with political strategy and ancient economics.
Plus some brilliant linguistic mysteries that those study notes really bring to light. It operates on so many levels at once.
Yeah.
You have the immediate political reality on the ground, but running right underneath that, you have these massive theological themes playing out.
So, to set the scene for you, imagine you are Joseph. You're second in command in Egypt, essentially running the entire country during a catastrophic global famine.
And your family, who famously sold you into slavery years ago.
Right. Super awkward family dynamic there.
They have come down from Canaan just to survive.
So Joseph brings 5 of his brothers in to meet Pharaoh, the most powerful man on the planet. But he doesn't just walk them in blindly. He gives them a very specific public relations strategy.
He coaches them.
Exactly. He tells his brothers to explicitly identify themselves to Pharaoh as shepherds. And on the surface, that just sounds like stating an occupational fact.
But the study notes reveal it's actually a brilliant political maneuver to secure a specific territory, the land of Goshen. What's fascinating here is the cultural dynamic at play.
Because the Egyptians had a real issue with shepherds.
Right, exactly. You have to understand how ancient Egyptians viewed them. Culturally, they heavily distanced themselves from shepherds. The text actually notes that the occupation was considered distasteful, an abomination even.
So why lean into that?
Because Joseph is playing a much longer game. By highlighting their profession, he basically guarantees that Pharaoh will settle them in Goshen, completely separated from the main centers of Egyptian civilization.
Oh, which perfectly isolates them.
Right.
It keeps his family culturally and religiously intact, away from the immediate influence of Egyptian culture.
Yeah.
They aren't going to just assimilate if they're geographically cordoned off.
Precisely. Furthermore, it proves to Pharaoh that this massive group of immigrants is not a political threat.
They just want to herd their sheep.
Exactly. They aren't seeking government positions. They don't want military influence. And interestingly enough, they actually offer a practical contribution to society.
Right, because Pharaoh ends up putting the most capable brothers in charge of his own royal livestock.
It's a mutually beneficial arrangement born out of a calculated cultural taboo.
That strategic maneuvering is so smart, and it really sets the stage for an even more striking encounter. After the brothers meet Pharaoh, Joseph brings in his father, Jacob.
Picture the visual contrast in this room.
It's staggering. You have Pharaoh, the absolute monarch of the ancient world, viewed by his people as a living god.
Sitting in his royal court.
And standing in front of him is Jacob, an aged wandering shepherd, basically a climate refugee fleeing a severe famine. And the text tells us that Jacob blesses Pharaoh.
Not just once either.
Right, he blesses him twice, once at the beginning of the meeting and once at the end.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a stunning reversal of expected power dynamics. Normally, the greater person blesses the lesser person.
And Pharaoh literally holds Jacob's survival in his hands.
He holds the survival of his entire lineage in his hands, but the text is highlighting a profound theological reality here. It points back to the original promise made to Abraham.
That his lineage would act as mediators of God's blessing to all the nations.
Exactly. In this grand royal court, it's the wandering patriarch who carries the true divine blessing, dispensing it to the emperor of Egypt. It subverts everything we would expect from ancient Near Eastern protocol.
It's such a powerful moment. And during this brief ceremony, Pharaoh asks Jacob a pretty standard question. He asks, "How old are you?"
And Jacob's answer is poetic, but it carries a lot of weight.
He says he is 130 years old, but he calls his days few and difficult compared to the years of his ancestors.
To put that in context from the study notes, Abraham lived to be 175.
And Isaac lived to be 180.
So Jacob, even at 130, feels like his lifespan is falling short.
But what really stands out to me is the specific word he uses to describe his life. He calls it a pilgrimage.
That word choice is absolutely crucial. The Hebrew concept, translated as pilgrimage, reveals Jacob's entire worldview.
How so?
Well, he doesn't view his time on Earth or any land he temporarily inhabits as his ultimate home. He views his life as a temporary journey. The study notes point out that this reflects a deep theological longing for a permanent heavenly city.
So he and his ancestors were just sojourners.
Right. They didn't have permanent residency. It frames all of his struggles, the deception in his youth, the family betrayal, the presumed loss of Joseph, and now this famine, as difficult but temporary, stops along a much greater trajectory.
It's akin to the psychological difference between living out of a suitcase in a hotel room versus buying and furnishing a house. When you know you are just passing through, you don't anchor your ultimate security to your current surroundings.
That's a great way to put it.
Before we transition to the mechanics of the famine itself, there's a historical detail the study notes highlight right around here. The text mentions that Joseph settled his family in the land of Ramses, which is another name for Goshen.
Yes, the use of that specific name is a classic geographical anachronism.
Because Ramses didn't become the capital of Egypt until much later, right?
Right, roughly between 1295 and 1065 BC.
So we're clearly seeing a later scribal update. An editor is localizing the geography so their contemporary readers would instantly understand the location.
That is exactly what is happening. The physical land was obviously there during Joseph's time, but the name Ramses was applied retroactively for the sake of clarity for a future audience.
It just helps ground the historical narrative.
It's a very common feature in ancient manuscript transmission.
But while the family of Israel is settling into Goshen, the broader narrative takes a very dark turn. The tone shifts dramatically as we move from this royal family reunion into a severe, escalating economic crisis.
The famine becomes grave.
So grave that the text says the land of Canaan and the land of Egypt are literally fainting from it. We are talking about the brink of absolute societal collapse here.
And Joseph is tasked with managing this existential threat. The text actually provides a remarkably detailed look at ancient administrative efforts during a total environmental failure.
It unfolds in stages, doesn't it?
It does. First, the people use up all their money buying grain from the royal storehouses.
The currency is just completely drained.
From both Egypt and Canaan, the population is staring down starvation. They come to Joseph and demand food, asking why they should die right in front of him just because their silver is gone.
So Joseph institutes a massive barter system. Since currency is obsolete, he tells them to bring their livestock.
Horses, sheep, goats, donkeys.
And for an entire year, he trades life-saving food for those animals. He keeps the nation fed. But now the people have no money and no animals.
So the following year, they return to the administration completely out of options.
And this brings us to a moment that might be difficult to process today. The people make a desperate plea. They say, buy us and our land in exchange for food, and we will be servants to Pharaoh.
They voluntarily offer up their own bodies and their ancestral lands.
Okay, let's unpack this. They become servants to the state just to secure seeds so they can live. It's really hard to wrap my modern mind around a populace willingly giving up their freedom and property like that. Was this just sheer desperation, or was there a legal precedent for this kind of state-run servitude?
That is a vital question, and it requires us to look at the text through the lens of ancient history rather than modern sensibilities.
Right, because today that sounds incredibly dystopian.
It does. However, the study notes provide necessary context here. In the ancient Near East, slavery or servitude was often a practical, recognized legal mechanism for sheer survival.
A safety net.
Exactly. When your resources were completely exhausted, selling yourself into servitude ensured you didn't starve to death in the streets.
It was a brutal reality of the ancient world.
It was. Furthermore, this kind of servitude could often be temporary, ended once a debt was paid or a crisis subsided. The text actually shows us the perspective of the citizens themselves.
They don't view Joseph as an oppressive tyrant.
No, they view him as a savior. Their direct quoted response to this policy is, "You have saved our lives. May we find favor in the eyes of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants."
Wow. Under the dire circumstances of a multi-year famine, they saw this as a deeply positive outcome.
A necessary outcome for survival,
That historical framing changes the entire reading of the chapter. So Joseph buys all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, moving the people into the cities to distribute the food more efficiently.
Centralizing the population and the economy.
And then he establishes a new law, a flat tax. He declares that from now on, 1/5, 20% of all their agricultural harvests belongs to Pharaoh.
The other 4/5 are theirs to keep for seed and feeding their families.
Which, a 20% tax instituted right after losing your land sounds heavy.
It might, but it was remarkably generous for that era. The study notes offer a brilliant point of comparison to illustrate this.
Let's hear it.
If you look at Iraqi farmers in the 18th century BC, under the reign of Hammurabi, they often had to pay between a third and a half of their crops to the royal administration.
That is a staggering difference, 33 to 50%. Taking half of a farmer's crop would leave almost zero margin for error in a bad season.
Exactly. In that comparative light, Joseph's 20% policy is incredibly lenient. It left the farmers with enough resources to rebuild their lives and their communities.
So it actually worked.
Historically speaking, yes. These specific policies instituted by Joseph produced a level of political and economic stability in Egypt that lasted for centuries. It prevented a total societal collapse.
There was one fascinating exception to this entire economic overhaul, though. The Egyptian priests.
Yes, they were explicitly exempt.
They didn't have to sell their land or enter into this servitude.
Because they received a direct, fixed portion of food from Pharaoh. Their basic needs were unconditionally met by the state, so they never fell into the desperation that required them to sell their ancestral lands.
It really highlights the complex social hierarchy of ancient Egypt. Religion and state were so intertwined that the priests were insulated from the economic devastation.
While the rest of the populace had to surrender their autonomy just to survive.
But there is this incredible, almost paradoxical scene happening simultaneously over in Goshen. The text explicitly contrasts the two situations.
While Egypt is fainting,
the family of Israel in Goshen is acquiring property. They're being fruitful, and they are multiplying greatly. When I was reviewing the notes, the specific Hebrew word used for their fruitfulness really stood out.
Para.
Yes, it immediately reminded me of the language used in Genesis 1. Is the text drawing a direct line to the original creation mandate?
It absolutely is. Using the word para is a deliberate and profound theological choice by the author. It is the exact word used in God's original creation mandate. Be fruitful and multiply.
So it's not just demographic data.
No. By using para, the text is demonstrating that the divine blessing, the original intention of creation, is actively and powerfully working through the family of Israel.
In the very midst of a catastrophic death-dealing famine.
It's a microcosm of life thriving, surrounded by a landscape of death.
While the world around them is shrinking, they are expanding. Time passes in this state of contrast. The text tells us Jacob ends up living in the land of Egypt for 17 years.
He reaches the age of 147.
And he knows his time is coming to an end, so he calls for his son Joseph to make his final arrangements. And this isn't just a casual conversation about a will. Jacob demands a solemn, binding oath.
He makes Joseph put his hand under Jacob's thigh.
Which was a very serious ancient custom, right?
Placing the hand under the thigh was an act of total submission. It signified an unbreakable promise. It was reserved for the most crucial of vows, often related to lineage and the future of the family.
And Jacob's demand is intensely specific. He begs Joseph, "Do not bury me in Egypt. When I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place."
The cave of Machpelah in Hebron.
Back in the land of Canaan. After 17 years of unprecedented prosperity and safety in Goshen, Jacob outright refuses to let Egypt be his final resting place.
This moment is the climax of Jacob's life of faith. If we go back to his concept of the pilgrimage, we see it fully realized right here.
Because he's lived in Egypt for nearly 2 decades. His family is prospering.
They own property, they have the favor of Pharaoh. It would be entirely logical, even easy, for him to just accept Egypt as their new permanent reality.
But he refuses. He knows this isn't the final destination.
It is an expression of massive faith in a future promise. Jacob is making a definitive statement that the physical prosperity they are enjoying in Goshen is not the ultimate fulfillment of God's covenant.
Staking a physical claim on the promised land from his deathbed.
He is forcing his descendants to remember that they belong somewhere else and that one day they will return. It ensures his family doesn't lose their identity in their newfound Egyptian comfort.
And Joseph agrees. He swears the oath to his father. Which brings us to the very last verse of the chapter, and it contains one of the most fascinating translation mysteries in the text.
A great linguistic puzzle.
The narrative concludes by saying that after Joseph swore the oath, Israel bowed in worship at the head of the bed. Now, if you are reading carefully and cross-reference this moment with the New Testament, you notice a significant discrepancy.
Yes, the New Testament book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 21, references this exact moment. But it states that Jacob worshipped while leaning on the top of his staff, not his bed.
And the Septuagint does too, right?
Correct. The ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew texts also translates it as staff. So how do we get bed in Genesis and staff in the Greek and New Testament texts?
Well, in original biblical Hebrew, the text was written purely with consonants. In the specific case, the consonants are mem, tet, and he.
It wasn't until centuries later that scribes developed the Masoretic vowel pointings to standardize pronunciation.
And depending on how you vocalize those same exact original letters, the meaning shifts entirely. If you add the vowels to make it mitta, it translates to bed.
But if you add the vowels to make it matter, it translates to staff.
That is so cool. It highlights the incredible nuance of ancient manuscript transmission. Both translations are looking at the exact same root letters.
The later scribes who added the vowel points interpreted it as Jacob bowing weakly at the head of his bed, given his advanced age of 147.
While the translators of the Septuagint interpreted it as him leaning heavily on his shepherd's staff. What I love about this is that regardless of which vowel pointing you favor, the theological truth remains completely intact.
It really does.
Whether he is confined to his bed or leaning on the staff that accompanied him through his 130-year pilgrimage, the core meaning of the scene is an act of profound, reverent worship. Relief that God's promise regarding the promised land will be fulfilled.
It's a beautiful synthesis of human fragility and enduring faith.
So what does this all mean for you as you go about your week? As we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to Jacob's psychological framework of the pilgrimage.
It's a powerful mindset.
Imagine viewing your own life through that lens. When you hit a difficult season, an economic squeeze, a career setback, or just a period where everything feels few and difficult, viewing it as just a temporary stop on a much larger journey completely changes your perspective on hardship.
It removes the sting of permanence.
And conversely, when you hit a season of immense success, much like Israel prospering in Goshen while the world faints around them, that pilgrimage mindset keeps you grounded. It reminds you not to anchor your identity to your current comfort.
Because there is still a greater promise and purpose ahead. It provides a necessary emotional equilibrium.
Absolutely.
And looking at the broader societal narrative we covered today, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to ponder. We watched an entire civilization voluntarily trade their ancestral lands, their wealth, and their independence to the state for the sake of surviving a devastating famine. When faced with a true existential crisis in our own lives or societies, how do we balance the immediate pragmatic need for survival with the long-term preservation of our independence and autonomy?
That is a heavy tension.
It is a complex tension that humanity has wrestled with for thousands of years, and the echoes of those decisions are clearly still relevant today.
That is a profound question to carry with you. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through ancient texts, economic survival, and timeless human dilemmas. God blesses all the listeners. See you next time.